So here we are at the end of week 1 of the NBA offseason, and this is when most of the major moves are made across the league. And quite frankly, I was thoroughly entertained. Not only because there have been several storylines that have been manifested thanks to these moves, but more importantly, I do believe a lot of these transactions will manifest to a level of excellence that we will see in this upcoming season that will make this one of the very unique years of basketball that I probably have ever watched. And no, I do not say that to be over the top. I sincerely believe that this upcoming year of basketball will be very entertaining. And the reason why I say this is because I do believe there are a lot of winners in this year's offseason, and also there are a few teams out there that I'm not completely sure the direction that their franchise is heading into, and so again, I believe this upcoming season will reveal a lot. And so with that being said, let's get right into discussing the winners and losers of this year's offseason. First, let's talk about one of, if not the biggest winners in this year's offseason, and they are the Chicago Bulls. Chicago went into the offseason not only with some cap flexibility, but some pressure put on the front office to make some major changes, with Zach LaVine entering the last couple of years of his contract. And impressively enough, not only Chicago makes some major acquisitions, but they also kept a lot of quality pieces in the process. The first move that they made was acquiring Lonzo Ball in the sign and trade, and in that process, they didn't really give anything of value. After that, they added Alex Caruso as a backup defensive guard and possibly overpaid a bit, but I do believe it may have been necessary for an organization that has been struggling to stay relevant for the better part of the last 2 decades. And possibly one of the more unexpected transactions throughout the entire offseason is that the Chicago Bulls acquired DeMar DeRozan, and again, didn't really give up that much to the San Antonio Spurs in the sign and trade, which is why this offseason is so impressive for the Bulls. If you look at the amount of talent that they gained in contrast to what they lost, not only is it mind-blowing, but keep in mind they still have Kobe White and Lauri Markkanen. Not saying that they should immediately move off of them, but if there is some more quality pieces that they can receive in return, then I would definitely say make a push for it, especially because I still believe there are some concerns with the Chicago Bulls in terms of interior presence defensively. But offensively, I love what this team could potentially be. So all in all, I have to give the Chicago Bulls an A- to an A, potentially an A+, depending on what they do with Lauri Markkanen and Kobe White before the beginning of the season, because I definitely believe there are some teams out there willing to give up some defensive presence and in return receive some young pieces. Now, the second team I want to talk about is easily the only other team who could be in the conversation for the biggest winner in this year's offseason, and that team are the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, as we all know, in the playoffs, the Lakers were knocked out in the first round, and of course, there has to be some context implied there because both Anthony Davis and LeBron James were not 100%. However, just looking at the supporting cast and how they performed in that first round exit, it was clear that either the Lakers needed to address their severely lacking talent problem, or B, the Lakers just needed to find better players who fit around LeBron and AD, because the lack of three-point shooting was also very frightening moving forward if you were a Lakers fan. So, one of the very first moves in this offseason included Kyle Kuzma, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and Montrezl Harrell being moved to the Washington Wizards, and in return, the Lakers received Russell Westbrook. Now, of course, there has been a lot of concerns with this transaction, in particular, the lack of floor spacing and three-point shooting on the team, now that Westbrook will be playing on the perimeter alongside LeBron James. However, the Lakers obviously are aware of this, so they added some veteran pieces to the team, which is something that, again, was expected, especially because the lack of cap flexibility moving forward after adding Westbrook to the roster was very minimalistic. So you have players such as Carmelo Anthony, Dwight Howard, Trevor Ariza, Wayne Ellington, and Kent Bazemore, who was signed to the team right after the Russell Westbrook transaction, which was expected. But the two additions to the roster that, quite frankly, took a lot of people by surprise, including myself, were the additions of Malik Monk and Kendrick Nunn. Two players who are not only great three-point shooters, or at least have the potential to continue to be really great three-point shooters, but also two players who bring some flexibility, durability, and more importantly, potentially some dynamic play to a team that might need it, because we don't know what type of consistent play we will receive from some of the older players that have been added to this team. So I give the Lakers an A. Up next, we have the Miami Heat, and honestly, I am pretty torn about the direction that this Heat team is going into, because I don't know if the financial commitment will ever pay off. But before I get too ahead of myself, there are some positives when it comes to Miami in this offseason. First things first, the Heat decided to move off of Goran Dragic as well as Precious and bring in Kyle Lowry, who I believe is an upgrade from Goran Dragic, and I do believe the contract that they gave him though might be slightly a bit overpaid, but it's still very respectable. Another thing that they did is bring back both Victor Oladipo and Duncan Robinson, and I believe the contracts that both of those players received, again, are very respectable. Another addition I like for this team is the PJ Tucker acquisition. PJ Tucker, solid defensive player, especially at his age, quality corner three-point shooter, and I believe is a great replacement of Iguodala, who they lost, and possibly, and more importantly, PJ Tucker just fits the Miami Heat culture, so I love that as well. But here are my two concerns with the Heat's offseason. The first being the loss of Kendrick Nunn for nothing. Now, of course, I'm not saying that it would make sense to pay Kendrick Nunn the money that he's probably expecting in this year's free agency class, so understandable. However, if this was the direction that you were going to go into, I would argue sometime during the regular season, why not try to just trade Kendrick Nunn? But more importantly, the biggest question I have is the contract extension that they gave to Jimmy Butler, which was outrageous. A 4-year contract extension that is spanning over $180 million. And for the people out there who need a better understanding of the level of financial commitment that we're seeing from the Miami Heat, at the age of 34, Jimmy Butler is owed nearly $44 million. At 35, he's owed $47 million. And at 36 years old, Jimmy Butler will be getting paid $50 million, which is just insane. Now, especially when you stop and acknowledge that more than likely, looking at the rest of this roster, the Miami Heat could potentially just peak out as a second round exit team. So again, I don't necessarily know if that level of financial commitment will ever be worth it. And because of that, even though there are some positives with Miami this offseason, I have no other choice but to give them a B-. Up next, we have the Phoenix Suns, who didn't really do too much of anything. However, I still believe they had a really solid offseason. They bought in both Landry Shamet and JaVale McGee, two quality bench players that should add to their depth, especially JaVale McGee, because last year during the postseason, when DeAndre Ayton was off the floor, the Suns had really no other choice but to play small ball, which really hurt them in the NBA Finals. Also, they were able to retain both Cameron Payne and Chris Paul. In terms of Cameron Payne, they did it on a very team-friendly contract, so again, shout out to the Phoenix Suns. And then in terms of Chris Paul, even though that contract really wasn't team friendly, and I know a lot of people are concerned about the last 2 years of that deal, especially because it is not only massive, but also because Chris Paul will be paid $30 million at the age of 39 and 40 years old. However, please be very mindful that the last 2 years of that contract are not 100% guaranteed, and actually the last year of CP3's deal is not guaranteed at all. So all in all, even though it may be a hefty financial commitment to an aging Chris Paul, but honestly, I don't really know if the Phoenix Suns had any other choice but to go in that direction, and because of this, I'll give the Suns a B+ to an A-. Up next, we have the San Antonio Spurs, and I knew that this offseason was eventually going to come, but man, did the Spurs lose a lot and really did not receive much in return. So far in this offseason, the Spurs have lost DeRozan, Patty Mills, Rudy Gay, Gorgui Dieng, and Trey Lyles, and the only thing of true value that they received in return for any of these players or any type of acquisition throughout the offseason, in my opinion, is the 2025 first round pick that they received from the Chicago Bulls. So that's probably the only positive. I do like Brent Forbes. I do like Doug McDermott. I do like Thaddeus Young. However, I don't know what that's going to do for a Spurs team that's more than likely looking to rebuild in the near future. So all in all, I give the Spurs a C- for losing that much talent and in return at best receiving a mid to late first round pick. Up next, we have the New Orleans Pelicans, and this is another team that I will be very critical on, mainly because I do not believe that they received what they should have in return for the value that they gave up. First, the Pelicans moved off of the Eric Bledsoe and Steven Adams contracts, which is understandable because there's no need to pay them that much money. However, the amount of draft compensation that they gave up to move off of those contracts completely defeated the purpose of why they acquired those contracts to begin with, because last offseason, the Pelicans received a lot of draft compensation from the Milwaukee Bucks, But if you're going to turn around and have to move down in this year's draft class from the 10th overall selection to the 17th overall pick, and then also have to give up one of the Lakers pick that they received from the Anthony Davis trade, and also have to move off of one of your own first round picks in the upcoming draft, quite frankly, doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose? But in my opinion, it actually gets worse because they moved off of Lonzo Ball, and the only thing that they received in return was Thomas Satoransky and Garrett Temple. Granted, I understand they weren't going to pay him that much money to essentially to be an off-ball guard, all understandable, which is why they were replacing him with Devontae Graham. However, I just personally believe that Lonzo would have been a better fit for this team, especially for defensive purposes, and also Lonzo was becoming a better three-point shooter. Understandable that you don't want to pay that much, but if you're not going to pay that much, at least get more than Satoransky and Garrett Temple. Also, I do like the Valanciunas addition, but with him being on an expiring contract, I don't know if this is going to be a long-time play or just a one-year tryout to try to see what a team will look like with a bunch of floor spaces around Zion. So it will be intriguing to see what this team will look like moving forward, but all in all, I'm not the biggest fan of the Pelicans offseason, so I'm going to give them a C. Up next, we have the New York Knicks, and honestly, I love what New York did this offseason. I don't know what it's going to translate to because the Eastern Conference is going to be very competitive, especially with the 4 last spots in the playoff race. But all in all, the Knicks needed three-point shooting, which they got. They needed veterans, which they got. And they didn't need to overcommit financially, which is something that they normally do. And they didn't do it this offseason. And I also believe the players that they added to the team, such as Evan Fournier and Kemba Walker, bringing back Derrick Rose, are all players who are not only veterans, but also these are veterans that are not going to overstep their boundaries and suffocate the growth of players such as RJ Barrett and Obi Toppin. So, personally speaking, I give the New York Knicks a B+ to an A-. And finally, my 2 biggest losers in this year's offseason so far have to be the Philadelphia 76ers and the Golden State Warriors. I am blown away that we are this deep into free agency and neither one of these teams have made any major acquisitions. 2 teams that need to make their roster more complete and more competitive in this upcoming season. Now, when it comes to the Warriors, they still have some time, and I do not mind the Otto Porter addition at all. But my goodness, there are a lot of flaws with this team still. I believe that they should still go after Miles Turner if he's still available, and even though Andrew Wiggins has improved noticeably, spending that much money on one player on the roster who more than likely will be the 3rd option on this team is just unexcusable. And looking at the rest of the Western Conference, to be completely frank with you, even if Klay Thompson is 100% healthy, this team cannot compete for a championship. And I would go as far as saying that I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Warriors get knocked out in the 2nd round of the playoffs. Maybe even first, depending on how low in the standings they finish the regular season off in. And then when it comes to the 76ers, not only do they still have Ben Simmons on their roster, and some of the trade offers that they have been rumored to receive for Simmons' service has been laughable. But also, adding Drummond to this team is even funnier. I actually thought it was a joke when the first time I saw it, because not only has there been some tension between Andre Drummond and Joel Embiid in previous matchups, but also adding another non-floor spacer to a roster that needs three-point shooting is just ridiculous. It feels as if the process is starting to just go backwards now. And with Joel Embiid only having 2 years left on his contract, for this offseason to end the way that it is looking like it's going to end is very scary if you are a Sixers fan. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button. Also, hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you can be updated when I upload these videos. And make sure you follow me on Twitter to be updated on all of the things that I'm doing in the NBA community. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.